What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Friday, July 29th, 2016, last day of the week, last day of the broadcast month. 1 month to go to my next birthday, and that's going to put me in a really foul mood. And we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. I have been assured the 800 phone number is working properly today, and that's 800-313-9443. And Dan is currently in our control room. Mike will be taking over here in just a little tiny bit. Quick program note, yes, the lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 with her unique perspective on the world. So getting right into it, as you know, the Democratic Convention is now officially over. People are looking back at it. So far, it doesn't look like Hillary is getting a post-convention bump in the polls. In fact, Trump is continuing to pull ahead. And the fact of the matter is the Democratic Convention has actually done a lot more harm to the brand, as it were, than good, because it showed a badly factionalized party. A party that is engaging in fraud against its own members and fraud against the public, because we're getting this flood of reports and newspaper ads about how the Democrats, when the Bernie Sanders supporters walked out, left a huge number of empty seats, and the message on that fourth day of the convention was unity, unity, unity. All the Democrats are firmly behind Hillary Clinton, and they were hiring people for something like $10 an hour to sit in those chairs and clap on cue like trained sea lions at the circus. And basically, the message that's going out from that is that because of all the shenanigans the DNC did against Bernie Sanders, they've alienated a lot of their party base. And even with all the election fraud in the world, if Hillary does not have that Democratic Party base, she cannot win in November. Now, normally when elections are close and they're close enough to rig with the vote fraud or just an ad campaign, the base is kind of something that's sort of left to take care of itself. But now Hillary's going to have to go on out and convince that base that somehow she is a better candidate for president than Donald Trump. And that's going to be a real, real tough task for her to do because of all the emerging scandals, the blowback from the fraud, even people who were sort of falling for that idea that all of these allegations of fraud and criminal activity on the part of Hillary was just part of the vast right-wing conspiracy, and it's all made-up stuff because they hate women and so forth. Even a lot of those people are looking at what came out during that Democratic convention and realizing, yeah, there is a there. And they're out there basically pushing this whole situation as hard as they can. So let's see. I must have said something somebody didn't like because my server is under attack again. And I'll just take care of that real quick. Now, getting on back to the news. Apparently, the Democratic National Convention was still playing games right up to the very end. There were stories of white noise generators brought in to be placed over the heads of troublesome delegations that weren't going along with Hillary, so they couldn't be heard or understood. Apparently, over the Oregon delegation, they cut the lights off when they started chanting, "No more war, no more war." I mean, that's a real problem for them. The American people are tired of war, and that includes a lot of Democrats. And the older Democrats are probably remembering, it used to be the Republicans who were the party of war and conquest, and the Democrats tended to be the party of peace. Now it's all reversed. Now, the corporate media is up to their usual games. Apparently, CBS edited video to try and make it look like people were protesting Donald Trump. And sharp-eyed observers took a look and discovered that, in point of fact, the footage CBS was putting up next to Donald Trump was actually from the Democratic Convention of people yelling "No more war" at Leon Panetta. So even with all the embarrassments and humiliation, the corporate media is still out there doing what they're paid millions of dollars to do, which is to try and deceive you, keep you confused, keep you from seeing what's really going on out there in the world. Now, one of Bernie Sanders' delegates lost their DNC credentials for holding up a Stop TPP sign. This is Frank Klein. He was up from Arkansas, and he was stripped of his credentials and kicked off the floor for holding up a supposedly unauthorized sign, Stop TPP, even though Hillary stated from that stage that she is opposed to TPP. And, of course, support for TPP is now part of the Democratic Party platform. So obviously Hillary is lying again. Now, to try and make this illusion of party unity, people who were in the convention last night, anybody who had a Bernie Sanders sign, it was taken away. And they were told, if you want to get in there, you will hold this Hillary sign. And apparently a lot of the people took it upon themselves to vandalize the Hillary signs and use the letters to simply spell out the message liar. And I think it's a measure of just how fed up the American people are with this whole fiasco, this whole circus that's going on out there. Now, it is coming out, a lot of people were very disappointed that Bernie Sanders, just months ago was saying Hillary can never be allowed to be president, and then all of a sudden he's out there, Hillary's the best qualified, you need to vote for her, which a lot of people were booing at him, and his supporters are feeling betrayed, like he sold them out. And now we're beginning to hear part of what was going on. Bernie Sanders was apparently threatened with the loss of his Senate committee position if he didn't endorse Hillary. So pressure was being put on him by Democrats inside the Congress. You either endorse Hillary or we're going to put you in charge of dog catchers for the rest of your term in office. Now, Hillary is out there making her speech, officially accepting the nomination, which is rather absurd. Do you really think anybody would get up there and say, I changed my mind? Go with the other guy? Not going to happen. But she basically went out there and tried to say all the things she thought that audience wanted to hear. And that's how Hillary operates. When she's in front of the environmentalists, she'll talk about ending carbon dioxide and shutting down the coal mines. Then when she's in front of the coal miners, she'll say, no, we're going to support you and subsidize you, and just flips back and forth. So Hillary is up there making the speech, we will work to get money out of politics. This on the exact same day she accepted a $25 million donation from George Soros. And there's a very telling article over, believe it or not, in Reuters on how Hillary Clinton's 1% dilemma is getting more and more awkward because she's up there on the stage blasting the rich and talking about inequality and how we've got to deal with all these greedy billionaires, and yet those billionaires remain her biggest donors. Obviously, these billionaires know that she doesn't mean anything that she's saying up there about reining in the out-of-control banking industry. And the donations kind of show the bias, because so far, just counting money coming in from hedge funds, Hillary Clinton has taken in $48.5 million. So far, Donald Trump has accepted $19,000 from hedge funds. It's quite a disparity. Now, Hillary was also up there trying to reassure everybody that she's not there to take away your guns. And we know that's an absolute lie. From statements she's made earlier in her career. There was one time when she was on Fox News, on ABC, she refused to state whether or not American citizens had a constitutional right to own guns. And her plans, along with the gun grabbers, is to make guns much more expensive with costly new background checks that the applicant has to pay for, heavy taxes on the guns, heavy taxes on the ammunition. Sure, you've got a right to keep and bear arms, as long as you're able to afford the $250,000 it's going to cost to have one. Now, they're trying to play both sides on this abortion funding issue because Hillary Clinton is out there talking about repealing the Hyde Amendment, which bans public funding for abortion, except in cases of rape, incest, and life endangerment. In an interview with CNN, Kaine just came out and said he supports the Hyde Amendment. He doesn't think there ought to be public funding for abortions. And regardless of which side of that issue you come down on, you see Kaine and Clinton trying to play both ends, trying to say what they think the audience they're talking to wants to hear. And that means you cannot take either of their words about anything. Now, there was an interesting little video that came on out. It was part of a much larger video collection of epic fails by feminists and liberals in general, and it's funny to watch. It really is. But there was this one shot of Donald Trump, and he's at a meeting, and this girl gets up, and you can tell from her body language, she's there for blood. She's just, like looking at Donald Trump like he's pond scum. And she comes on out and says, I think women should be paid equal pay to men. What do you think about that? She's trying to put him on the spot. Donald Trump came back with the absolutely perfect answer. Yeah, if you're doing the same quality of work as a man, you should get the same pay, which is a perfectly acceptable position, I think. But it wasn't what this girl wanted, and you could see it on her face. She was ready to pounce on him, and she didn't get it. Now, on that issue, of course, Hillary Clinton is out there about, equal, women should be paid the same as men for the same job. But when she was back at the State Department, she didn't walk her own talk. When she was in the U.S. Senate, Clinton paid women on her staff 72 cents for each dollar paid to men. This was a report from the Washington Free Beacon. So Hillary doesn't walk her talk. She pays women less because she can get away with it. Now, over on Fox and Friends, they actually took a look at some of the statements being made by people on that Democratic convention stage and basically came on out and said, this was a lie, this part was true, but if you look deeper, you'll realize it's not as it's being presented. And they just ripped it to shreds. And that is definitely the defining hallmark of the current Democratic Party. Liar, liar, liar. If at first you don't succeed, lie, lie again. And again, one of the items that has surfaced in this WikiLeaks dump is the fact that Hillary Clinton was sent Michael Hastings' investigative report on Benghazi 5 months before he died in this highly suspicious car crash. And Hastings had been a thorn in the side of the establishment as a whole, because he was writing articles that were exposing wrongdoing by the CIA, by the FBI. A lot of people did not like him. Shortly before his death, he had told people that he was, in fact, being investigated by the FBI. And he also told his friends that if he turned up dead, that it wasn't suicide. He feared for his life. So we've added him to the Clinton dead bodies list because of this revelation from the WikiLeaks email that, yes, there was a big stink about Benghazi. Benghazi is a sore point for Hillary Clinton because of that whopper about this all being a spontaneous protest over the video. Now then, Hillary Clinton also got onto this agenda of trying to destroy our cultural and historical identity. And she was talking about the Confederate flag. It's hate-filled and a disgusting public image. And she's a full-blown hypocrite. Because back in 1992, when Bill Clinton and Al Gore were running for office, one of the common themes they put out in the American South was their names over a Confederate flag. And as a matter of fact, I've got images in my archive here of Hillary Clinton political regalia from her 2008 run for the White House that includes that Confederate flag. So she's just being a hypocrite. She's telling the audience what she thinks the audience wants to hear, and it's absolutely meaningless. It's absolutely meaningless. So, let's see. I need to reply to somebody. It's very, very busy over here in Radio Land, trying to handle all these things myself. Okay, so, Now, Hillary's campaign is falling back on the same old tired dodges they have been using all along. You know, Hillary didn't do anything wrong. It's all an evil plot. It's all conspiracy theory. And opposition to Hillary is just from people who are misogynist and they hate Hillary. And we've got to understand these people may be mentally ill. And a typical example of that came out of, and I was surprised to see it over there, but Op-Ed News. What does the virulent hatred of Hillary Clinton really mean for our democracy in the long term? And first of all, even having the word democracy in the same headline with Hillary Clinton, following the revelation that the Democratic primaries were rigged from top to bottom, that right there is an insult to the reader's intelligence. But this article goes on to say the level of hatred and hostility towards Hillary is staggering. You know, like we're just automatically not supposed to hate Hillary Clinton. And it really isn't an issue of hate. It's opposition. But according to the latest media push, and we're going to see this nonstop from now through November, Benghazi, voter fraud, secret private server with classified material, using the Clinton Foundation as a cover for tax evasion, hiring cronies, taking bribes from foreign countries, the whole list, turning Libya into a chaos. I mean, it's a huge long list, and I posted it in my comment here. We're not supposed to think about any of that. People who are opposed to Hillary are only opposed to her because they hate her or they hate women or so on. And they have played this card so many times. They have to be... It's wearing out. Nobody's going to buy this nonsense. That's like saying, you know, the Nazis really didn't do anything bad. People just hate the Germans. And it's absurd. Okay. One more story. I'm going to take this next phone call in the next segment here because I got a couple of stories. Snopes has come under a cloud of mistrust lately because they seem to be acting less as arbiters of what is fraudulent and more as gatekeepers of the official story. And Snopes has an article on the firing of Hillary Clinton from the Watergate Committee, and they have declared it false, complete hoax. And they go down this whole long thing about, no, it wasn't anything at all like the stories by the Hillary haters. And yet the guy who fired Hillary, Jeff Ziefman, has gone public saying, yes, he did, and he still has his diary from 1974. Because everybody understood that what they were doing with the Watergate investigation into Richard Nixon was going to be historical. And everybody was encouraged, keep a record, keep a diary of everything that's happening. So he's the guy who did the firing, and he still has the notes he took when it was going on down. So Snopes got busted. They cannot be trusted. Google, their search function got some unwelcome attention because apparently on Wednesday, if you typed in Trump's 2015 book, Crippled America, into a Google image search, it would bring up pictures of Adolf Hitler's 1920s Mein Kampf. And then apparently last June, when anybody typing in when was Hitler born, would get a picture of Donald Trump and his birthday. Now, Google has fixed all of this and assured us all it was just a technical goof. Really, nothing nefarious here whatsoever, that it happened twice that we linked Donald Trump and Adolf Hitler. It's really just, a technical thing. And anybody who thinks that there was anything nefarious is just a tinfoil hat, wingnut, wacko conspiracy theorist. Except, of course, these leaked DNC emails demonstrated once again the conspiracy theorists are telling the truth while the corporate media is still out there with their bovine excrement howitzer trying to keep you dazzled and confused as to what's going on. Going to take a break for commercials. When we come on back, we'll be taking a phone call. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to go take some phone calls, and we're going to start with Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk to you about the migrants in Europe.
Yes.
At first they opened the borders to let all of the migrants in, and it angered a lot of Europeans. Mm-hmm. Now you have a string of violent acts, rapes, and a lot of atrocities against the Europeans, and you anger them even more. It just seems too convenient. It's just, I'm not buying it. To me, I think, they let these migrants come in, then they hired a couple people here and there to go around and just create atrocities to anger the people even more, to get the Europeans Christians versus the Muslims.
Well, that's one of the many overlapping agendas. What's important to keep in mind as we watch events unfold is there is no monolithic control of planet Earth. There are differing groups with differing agendas, and sometimes those agendas collide with each other. And what we have here is the agenda to form these strong multinational unions as a stepping stone to a one-world government. And then part of that same one-world government agenda is to destroy our cultural, regional, and historic identity by simply blurring everybody together. But unfortunately, the way in which they were luring and encouraging these refugees to go into Europe, it kind of filtered out decent people, and Europe kind of got the worst of them, to be very, very blunt. And so now these two particular agendas have collided head-on. Okay?
Yeah, because, I'm sorry. You had Europe, Muslims living in Europe before.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like they weren't living there, maybe not as much as they have now. And you never heard of atrocities like this.
No,
not to the extent what's happening now.
Because those Muslims who were living in Europe had adapted to that culture and language and were good people. When you're talking about immigration or migration, especially the way it's being handled now, it's a filtering process. The people who are doing well in their home countries are going to stay there. Remember when Israel tried to bribe Iranian Jews to immigrate to Israel? And the Iranian Jews said, no, we're comfortable here. We're doing great. Nobody's bothering us. They've got one of the world's oldest continuously operating synagogues is in Iran. And they said no. And so this process by which these refugees are being driven toward Europe, they're getting people who don't represent the best of the country of origin. We saw the same thing here with the illegal immigrants coming across the border without control. What we're getting are people who couldn't make it in their home country. We're getting people who are fleeing prosecution. And all of them are being lured with these absolutely unrealistic promises of the benefits they're going to have when they get to the destination country. And then, of course, when they get there and the free stuff isn't forthcoming, they get very angry and they start acting out. And it's, again, we're seeing this epiphenomenon, if you will, of these overlapping, contradictory approaches to these often conflicting agendas.
Yeah, it's just an ugly mess, and I really don't see it getting any better either. I just
it'll get better as soon as they close those borders, but that's something that the New World Order people are opposed to. They want to flood every single nation with foreigners until it stops being that nation. And that's really a big part of what's going on there. And the message they're giving out to the populations are, the rapes and the violence and all the rest of it, that's just a price you're all going to have to pay to live in a multicultural, transnational, global government. And, of course, the response coming back from people is, I don't want to live in a glorious transnational global government. I want to live in the country I was born in. I want to be a Frenchman. I want to be Swedish. I want to be British. I want to be American. I don't want to be forcibly turned into something else.
Yeah, I just don't see it ending well. I hope it all works out, but people just got to come to the realization that this is their plan and, it needs to be stopped. Europe needs to go back to being the separate European nations, and they need to start controlling their borders. And that's just common sense. And we're not talking about racism or locking people out. We're talking about a responsible immigration policy where people who are allowed to move into the country represent a benefit to that country and not just open the gates to criminals and malcontents and terrorists and not to mention fanatics who are coming on in and demanding the European countries start be transformed to the very country they just fled from, which really strikes me as counterproductive. Anyway, listen, Steve, got to let you go. Got to take another break for commercials, and we'll be back with another phone call. And
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take some phone calls. The lines are loaded up here. We're going to start with Mark in Oregon. Thank you for waiting patiently. What's on your mind today?
Thank you, Mike, and aloha to you in Hawaii.
Yes.
Well, Mike, I wanted to ask you a question, a short question, short answer question, I think, and wanted to make a short statement. The question is, I haven't heard anyone discussing the presidential debate schedule, and now we have two presidential candidates. I'm expecting the debates to come up in the very near future. Do you have any information on this?
No, I don't, and I'll tell you, it's going to be an historic effect. Right, Hillary does not want to debate with Donald Trump, because Hillary, she operates with scripts and teleprompters and knowing what the reporters' questions are going to be. That's why she hasn't had an open press conference in over 230 days. Donald Trump, on the other hand, everything he knows is already in his head. He speaks his mind. He can communicate extemporaneously, just off the cuff. And yes, it's gotten him into some trouble, but he's obviously his own person there. And when they get Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton on a stage, even with Hillary Clinton wanting to choose the venue and choose the moderators and all the other stuff there, the instant Donald Trump and Hillary start talking to each other and questioning each other, he's going to eat her alive. And so that's why at this point there's a tremendous reluctance on the part of Hillary's campaign to schedule any debates. But it's going to be very, very difficult to convince people to vote for a presidential candidate who isn't willing to have an open debate with her rival.
I don't think that the debate forum is the only way that Donald Trump can effectively make such points as, getting into my statement, Mike, this infinite tonnage elephant in the room, and that is that about 4 months ago, Donald Trump mentioned it in a public forum, and he said that the presidency, as well as the State Department, headed by Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, are actually the main designers, implementers of this monstrous activity and current events that we have going on now, which is ISIS and all of its manifestations, and the murder, and the harm, and the fear, and how it leads into the next level of the agenda. One thing leads into the next, but they're also behind the Arab Spring that preceded ISIS, basically, that ISIS was born out of. We know ISIS goes all the way back, I think you understand, Mike, into the 1928 era, and they were actually allies called the Muslim Brotherhood then, but they were founded by British intelligence as well as the Office for Strategic Services, the predecessor to the CIA. So you have basically from quite a long time, decades ago, this large stage of the plan, you have the Muslim Brotherhood turning into, metamorphosing through Al-Qaeda into ISIS, basically. Is still the same group, just the worst of the worst out of Al-Qaeda, basically, as I understand it. And they commit atrocities that are just to the maximum, and it's all leading
for PR effect, propaganda effect. And you're absolutely right. And it did come out in some of the documents pried loose by Judicial Watch that the Obama administration and Hillary Clinton's State Department were actively supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria as a proxy against Bashar al-Assad. And the hub for the gun-running operation was that consulate in Benghazi. And that's why when the attack happened, they wanted that consulate burned to the ground to get rid of the paperwork. Same reason they blew up the...
Mike, it was to get rid of the ambassador himself and his staff, because the ambassador was against selling shoulder-to-air-fired missiles that can bring down passenger liners to ISIS. Now there's the other, really a very large elephant in the room. When these things would be brought out into the public forum of knowledge by Donald Trump, if he can pull that off with all the resistance that is coming against him, and I think if anyone can, he can. There's no one else in the world that could, but he happens to be the man chosen by God, if you will, for the time that we're in right now and the near future as such. I believe he's going to have success all the way through. I don't know how, but I believe God's on his side and God is behind him. But if that happens, it will cause such a reverberating effect through the nation that we have a traitor, an arch traitor, running to be in charge of us in the very near future. I think it would bring some changes about that would perhaps happen too late or not at all before we get to the point of no return with Hillary Clinton. But
well, you know, the change that Donald Trump would trigger or catalyze, the people who don't want that change are definitely aligned against him. And I'm concerned that there is going to be a serious attempt on his life, at which point, who knows what the American people are going to do. They're already furious over the party machine politics, and I doubt they would sit still for it. Donald Trump has already done a tremendous service to the independent media when he was back there talking about how fishy Vince Foster's death was. All of a sudden, this accumulated burden of scandals and questions from the last quarter of a century overnight became current events, and everybody started talking about it again and looking at the various online articles. There is just too much there to dismiss as, you know, made up by the vast right-wing conspiracy. And there's another old Clinton scandal that has resurfaced as a current event. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later in the show, okay?
well, you're wonderful, Mike. God bless you, sir.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Richard in Idaho. Aloha, Richard. What's on your mind today?
Hi, Michael. I just wanted to add my voice to those many who think you're probably one of the best talk show hosts on the air that can get to the point, and it's just refreshing to hear this. I know you have an affinity for science and NASA. Yes, I'd vote for you.
Well, then I'd have to figure out how to make it all work, you know. And I did have a joke campaign running, Rivero 2016. He could hardly do any worse. And we had buttons and coffee cups and everything. But, in all seriousness, I think if there is something tangible that the independent media can point to with pride, it is that we took away from the government and the corporate media their ability to lie to the public with impunity. And now that the American people have been made skeptical by the exposure of all the lies they've seen before, each new lie only further erodes the credibility of our political system and our corporate media that much more. I mean, when Hillary Clinton was being interviewed on 60 Minutes, she actually made the comment she was completely unaware the Democratic National Committee was trying to bias the primaries in her favor, and even CBS couldn't swallow that one, and they cut it out of the final broadcast, but the video is still over on their website.
Well, when you come out with comments like bovine excrement howitzer, I love it. I get a good chuckle. There's probably another... regarding NASA and your affinity towards the science part of it, there is another talk show host that I listen to once a week that answers a lot of the questions that I've noticed you put out there that really don't have a solid answer for. His name is Jim McCanney, and I think you would add an awesome dimension to your show if you could have him on. He does have a website called JMCCSCI, as in science.com, and he's very, very good at getting to the point like you.
Okay, well, I'll certainly make a point of looking him up. Right now, of course, I mean, I'm getting a lot of stuff sent to me from science and art and the rest of it. Right now, obviously, for the next few months, our focus has to be on the political race and the corruption and the cover-ups and all this other nonsense that's going on, okay?
Yeah, keep it up.
I will, as long as I can. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Mark in North Carolina. Aloha, Mark. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Mark, are you there? Nope, I guess we lost him. All right, just dropped off here. All right, so let's talk about that scandal from the 90s that has returned to haunt the Clintons. Now, there is this Chinese billionaire, Ng Lap Seng. He's 68 years old. He's been evading congressional investigators for years regarding questions about donations to Bill Clinton's re-election fund in 1996, which coordinated with Bill Clinton authorizing the sale to China of militarily sensitive technology. It was called the Chinagate scandal. And Congress wanted to investigate, and Seng was able to basically evade them. Well, he's just been arrested on an unrelated bribery case. He's inside the United States, and congressional investigators are finally going to get a chance to talk to him about the Chinagate scandal. So Chinagate is now current events, as it should be. And remember, what that Chinagate scandal was all about was U.S. secrets to a foreign government in exchange for foreign government money coming back as a donation. In 1996, it was to the re-election campaign. And this is why it is a very legitimate question to ask. And I'm going to go on asking it. Was Hillary Clinton selling U.S. secrets to foreign interests using her private email server with weaker security than Ashley Madison to deliver the goods and her so-called charitable foundation to collect and launder the payments? That is an important question. It deserves an answer. And nobody in the government, nobody in the corporate media will touch it, even to try and ridicule the idea. Okay, apparently Mark in North Carolina is back. Mark, what's on your mind?
Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Hey, Mike, I was searching on the web today, and I noticed that the Economist magazine, I think it's called, basically supporting Hillary now, and basically admitting they're globalists and they believe in globalism. And it seems to me that this new world order is coming out more and more and saying, you know, what heck with what you people want, and they're showing their true face.
Yes, they are.
True satanic faces. So, you know, I think we should understand that. And it's no longer Republican, Democrat, really. I keep telling people it's now populist nationalists on one side, that's most of us, and the other side, it's basically globalist, New World Order types. And, you know, people just need to get it through their heads and, you know, understand who the enemy really is. And by the way, a lot of these people we think are on the side of the populists like us are not. Like Glenn Beck is one of the biggest spokesmouths for now for the New World Order.
That's why he gets all those millions of dollars.
Right. He was actually putting down UKIP. He was putting down Marine Le Pen there in France. He was putting down Pegida. These are all patriotic parties in Europe. And he says the Russians are behind all of them. They're pulling the strings back there. Some guy named Dugin.
Oh, this is right out of the Cold War. You know, no matter what, anything bad that happens, Russia's to blame. Russia's behind human-caused global warming. Russia is stealing the socks out of my dryer. Russia's the reason I have dust bunnies underneath the sofa in my living room. I mean, it really is ridiculous. And what is amazing is they actually think it's going to work. And so far it isn't. I mean, they're being called on all this nonsense. Russia's not the problem.
But people got to understand something about Beck. Beck is a dirtbag. He is not stupid though. He's a good talker, and he's a spokesman for spokesmouth for people like Bill Kristol, who really have no charisma or anything like that, or can't talk. Beck does put on that act and all that, and makes believe he'll give you half truth, which is more dangerous than full lies. And he has spun this nonsense that Russia is behind fascism in Europe. They're behind he even said they were behind the Black Lives Matter. He didn't even say George Soros anymore. He said Russia is behind it. This guy, people need to call him on it.
Yeah, well, we're doing that right now here. But here's the situation you need to understand. Contrary to their own proclamations of greatness, the corporate media has lost a large part of their audience to the independent media. That's why they're spending so much time, hiring shills to go on online blogs and attacking servers and so forth, because the new high ground in the war for the minds of America is right here. These are the front lines that we're sitting on right now.
The problem is they're using some of the alternate media like Beck to try to push their message and to disguise it. because they know we're on to the mainstream media. Even Fox is totally compromised.
Well, you need to understand something. You need to understand something. Okay, just because a corporate media outlet has a website doesn't make them the independent media. And they've been trying to buy some of the more prominent independent media personalities to bring them on board. And people need to be very, very skeptical when somebody is an independent media analyst and commentator, and all of a sudden they get $5, $6, $7 million to build a new studio and facility. You have to look very closely. What do they stop talking about when they get that money, or what do they start talking about when they get that money? Because
another thing to understand about, one other thing to understand about Glenn Beck is he's got a guy named Buck Sexton on there.
Yes.
Who's also a talk show host. He is, they say, former CIA. I don't think he's former anything.
There's no such thing as former CIA. Once you are in for life. Yeah.
And this guy's a young guy. Why would he just quit the CIA like that, mysteriously, to work for Glenn Beck, for the Blaze? No, I think, like I said, I think this guy is probably Beck's handler.
You know what Operation Mockingbird is, right?
Yeah.
Okay, if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, just do a web search for Operation Mockingbird. That is the CIA's program to be in control of the executive level of all the major corporate media. And they started it right after World War II, and they play very, very seriously about this stuff.
I'm sorry, I confused that with Operation Northwoods.
No, Northwoods was the phony terror attack that they were going to use to try and reignite the war with Cuba. Operation Mockingbird, and of course the FBI has their own assets as well. That totally, basically, they want their assets in the executive wing of all the media. And I'll tell you what, on this upcoming break, I'm going to go ahead and repost my article on Operation Mockingbird to the main page of WhatReallyHappened.com, so you can sort of wade on in and get an idea of just how widespread this is. All right, let's see. Mark, thank you very much. We're going to let you go. We got 2 more callers waiting after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go back to the phones here. Alex in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Not much, Michael.
Oh, well, thank you for the call.
Watching from YouTube. Michael?
Yes, I'm here.
Hello?
You're on the air.
Yeah.
I'm just having fun with you.
Okay, I was watching some YouTube, and I saw some interviews with Chris Hedges. Do you know who he is?
Yes, I know who he is.
Quite concerning, his points, his views on this situation. How basically we can't count on either party at this point. I think he's so true about that.
Well, let's be clear here. Okay, he's right. You can't count on either party. That's why Donald Trump, as an outsider, has done so well. Yes, he's a Republican, but he's not seen as part of the Republican establishment, and that is why everybody is drawn to him. He represents an opportunity to trigger some substantive changes in the way this nation is being run. And obviously, those who don't want any changes, because the way things are running is great for them and their wallets, they're trying to find some way to block him from the White House. And again, if you read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, these people will start wars and assassinate world leaders to keep the human race enslaved to their little private central banking scam.
Well, I'm still kind of concerned because every time some candidate comes in for change, and Chris Hedges used this, he made this point about Bernie Sanders. He said he continuously, throughout his time as a candidate, he would always support the Democratic candidate. And they were asking what we should do. They asked him what we should do or what Bernie Sanders should have done. And he said Bernie Sanders should have run as an independent. And actually, when I think about that, I think that would have been the one thing that may have possibly enabled us to have a peaceful revolution.
Well, I disagree. I disagree. Let me cut in because we're coming up on a station break. I think Bernie Sanders should have gone after that email controversy in that first debate. And I think Bernie Sanders should be in court right now filing a lawsuit against Hillary's nomination, given the fact that there was enough fraud during the Democratic primaries that reversed the outcome. Because experts have looked at all the already exposed cases of fraud and deception and determined it was enough to steal that nomination away from Bernie Sanders. And unfortunately, he seems to lack the spine, or he doesn't want to wind up in Fort Marcy Park, and he's going to back down on it. But what we really need to do, if we want Donald Trump to bring in change, it's not enough to get him elected to the White House. We have to clean out the Congress of all the old guard who would obstruct and block and fight against change. We need a whole new Congress that will work with Donald Trump to bring that change to this country that we need. That's what we have to do.
We need feet in the streets.
Okay. Alex, thank you, Alex. Thank you for the phone call. We got to take a break for station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're going to take a few phone calls, and then we're going to close the lines at least for a little while because I got to get back to some of these stories here. So we're going to go to Mo in Florida. Mo, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, 2 questions, if you'll indulge me. I'll try to be quick. First of all, you're familiar with One American News, right?
With which American News?
One American News, OAN. We've sort of drifted by each other. Yeah, they just announced when this Hillary stuff, the Clinton stuff starts coming to the main news. I mean, they're not mainstream as CBS and all that, but they just mentioned this Seth Rich that was murdered, shot twice in the back. Nothing was taken.
Yes.
He was getting ready to testify against the Democratic people. He had some information on the crimes that the Democratic coalition was putting together. And then they also mentioned this Rich, this UN president that was getting ready to testify with his Chinese compatriot there that was funneling money to the Clinton Foundation. Yes. And they just basically said these are two murders, tracing them back to Clinton. I mean, they said, what? My wife was saying, man, this stuff's starting to get on, it seems like the floodgates are opening for it. It happens. I feel it, don't you?
Yeah, I do. And what's going on here, and we actually started to see it back during the war in Iraq, where the independent media is now starting to drive the news cycle. It used to be corporate media would decide what the American people needed to know, and that was basically what hit the air in the newspapers and the magazines. Then as more and more people turned to the independent media, and the independent media was reporting on things the corporate media was not, and the corporate media started having to acknowledge what was in the independent media, because people were calling up and saying, this is an important story, why are you ignoring it? And I think the watershed moment was the Downing Street memo, which we made headline news on the independent media about, yes, how the decision to go to war in Iraq had been arrived at between Bush and Blair, and they were fixing the propaganda around it, and it was headline news on the independent media for a month. And finally, the corporate media realized if they didn't cover it, it was going to cost them credibility and trust. And so finally, they grudgingly had to acknowledge it. So we're starting to see the same thing now. There is so much swirling around the Clintons and the Bushes and the narcocracy where to not report on any of it is going to cost them more of their audience. Now, of course, there are...
Michael, I think it's exciting, but it's kind of scary, but you just want to see these people pay the price. But one other quick question, I'll let you go because I know you said you want to get your stories. But I know Trump's in Colorado Springs giving a speech right now.
Yeah.
What do you think he would say, since he's a builder and in New York and the whole thing? If somebody asks the question, Mr. Trump, what took down World Trade Center Building 7? What do you think he would say?
I really don't know. I'm sure that as a builder, he understands the official story is suspect. But again, looking at the way the entire establishment media and even his own party attack him for everything he says, even jokes about Russia, I think he would probably have a very simple, non-committal answer. because he understands he's at the stage of his career where it's one Donald Trump against the entire Democratic Party, the entire corporate media, Wall Street, and the rest of it. And he's going to be very, very careful about what he says. What is far more important, what is far more important is once he's in the Oval Office and somebody asks him that question, what will he say? And at that point, I think he's going to be about as honest and forthright about 9/11 as he was about Vince Foster. There's something very fishy there.
Yeah, well, it's pretty obvious that was a planned demolition. Those bombs were put in there way before the planes flew around and whatever they did. So
there's no question about it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Mike.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. And obviously, as we get closer to the anniversary of 9/11, we'll go back over all of this information. President Bush just sitting at that school after knowing it was a terror attack, reading about pet goats, the Secret Service obvious awareness that he was not a target by their inaction. And just we'll go over that all over again. And if you can't wait, there's a 9/11 link at the top of my page. And by the way, I did put up that article about Operation Mockingbird, for those of you who are not familiar, at the extent of control over corporate media exerted by the U.S. government. So, getting back to the phones, Dustin in New Jersey, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Yeah, on the previous callers, they mentioned something about global. This is collectivism, basically communism versus nationalism. I mean, this is what it's coming down to, Well,
I'm going to have to disagree with you a little bit, because when you have any kind of a government centered on a private central bank, it is inherently fascistic, not socialistic. And that's what they're trying to build, a global fascist economic dictatorship where the rich get insanely rich and the entire human race lives in permanent debt slavery. That's what the New World Order is all about.
And Mike, and like in Chicago, you don't bring a knife to a gunfight. It's going to come down to like fighting with your fists, or more than that, because these people, I mean, they kill people, and they don't have no problem doing it. So they're not going to really care about you protesting per se, or like I said, calling your congressman or writing. It's not going to do crap in the end.
No, it isn't. And what's going to happen, and again, I've been saying this all along, is we are going to see the U.S. federal government collapse from its own rot and corruption the way the former Soviet Union did. And we're going to have about 4 months of having to get by and take care of each other the best that we can while we form a whole new government in this land based on those original constitutional principles. And we're going to add a few more, like no more private central banks ever, 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 ever. So, I want to do a quick shout-out to our on-air affiliates who are now rejoining our network, and we're basically taking phone calls, and we're going to be getting back into the general news here in just a minute. Anyway, Dustin, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and this is going to be our last phone call for a while because I got to get caught up in some of the stories. Alan in Chicago. Aloha, Alan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Mike. I'll keep this brief. After 4 days of watching and listening to the DNC, I'm feeling like George Bailey did when Clarence was taking him around Bedford Falls, and he's showing him what it would have been like if he was never been born. It's just incredible. I don't even recognize my country when I'm listening to the DNC. But my question to you is, about a month ago, I was listening to the radio, and sometimes I get it where it's called Art Bell Somewhere in Time. And I thought he was back because they were talking about all the Clinton crimes and everything. And I found out the date was somewhere around 1996, and when he was running for re-election. And you know better than anybody, boy, when you listen to already only after 4 years of them being in the office, the crimes that people were concerned about calling in then.
Yes.
And then you listen to some of the Ross Perot debates before they got in. I think 20 years ago already, you look, and it's almost like bookends. Clinton's getting in now, and now they're trying to get in now. And you look at the last 20 years with NAFTA, all the Chinese rocket, technologies, the nuclear weapons that they were allowed North Korea to get, a lot of the things that went on, Travelgate, Ron Brown being killed, Vince Foster. Oh, my God. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I think to somebody that's maybe 20 years old now, they don't know any of that, Mike. And that's why I was just going to say that if that is just some buddy, if they have the YouTube videos from maybe those debates with George W. Bush Sr., Ross Perot, Bill Clinton, and then you look at maybe the re-election in '96, you'll be shocked to see who Hillary Clinton really is.
Yeah, and it's all going to be coming out, and it's going to be coming out bit by bit by bit between now and November. You know, the 20 years ago when I accidentally discovered the dark underbelly of what our government is really all about, hardly anybody knew what was really going on. They were all very naive. I believe in the government. I salute the flag. I oppose the clubbing of baby seals and all the rest of that. And it was kind of rough because you're out there saying, you know, we do have a government that's been corrupted by drug money, going back, all the way to Ronald Reagan. And people would say, oh, that's ridiculous. It's a conspiracy theory. Today, it's very, very different. Today, I mean, I've lost count of the number of letters and emails I've gotten from people I knew 20 years ago who are writing to apologize for having insulted me and called me all kinds of bad names, some of them in foreign languages. And they're saying, yeah, you were right, you had it. And it's not that I enjoy saying I told you so, I told you so. It's because our nation is still very much in danger. And we're not out of this yet. But general public awareness of how corrupt this government is an important step toward steering our nation to a position where that central government is going to collapse like the former Soviet Union. Now, one of the reasons they're pushing Hillary so hard is to recapture the dynastic control of the White House, because we have two families who are actually very good friends, and they've been linked going all the way back to that Iran-Contra gun and cocaine running operation, and that's the Bushes and that's the Clintons. And the idea was to have these two dynastic ruling families pass the White House back and forth, to make it look like there was some kind of a change going on, but in reality it's the same two ruling families. And Barack Obama was kind of the wild card who got on in when it was supposed to be Hillary Clinton. This election cycle, everybody got into a panic when Jeb Bush just basically flamed out. He couldn't connect to the voters, and his campaign was almost a joke. And it was at that point they began to realize we could get Donald Trump, who's not part of the narcocracy, and when he gets into that Oval Office and he starts to find out what this government has been up to, he's going to be furious to find out. And that's why I say it is not enough to get Donald Trump into the White House with an overwhelming landslide victory. We have to clean Congress out from all the establishment obstructionists, the Israel firsters, the war hawks. We need a cleaned out Congress to go with a cleaned out White House.
Well, I'll just say this last thing. I do think we do have an opportunity, because if you really look at some of the YouTube videos of people that were outside the DNC and inside that were, Bernie supporters, they realized they've been had and screwed over, and I really think there were some good people. They wanted some change, and they realized how crooked Hillary and the DNC, and I just pray that we can, just like you said, be an olive branch to them, don't make fun of them, and try to help them along, and I think that'll be enough to wind in the sail to elect Donald Trump.
I'm not bashing the Bernie supporters. I empathize with them. I mean, they're going through the shock that I went through 22 years ago. But it's not just the Bernie Sanders supporters. All Democrats got an ice water pail in the face looking at how the party machine really works. And it's not just the Democrats. We saw the same thing over at the GOP convention, where there was that last-ditch effort to find some way to get Donald Trump away from that nomination by changing the rules and unbinding the delegates, which was basically telling the Republican primary voters, what you want doesn't matter anymore. We will decide the candidates. We will decide the leaders. Sig Heil, Sig Heil, Sig Heil, and all the rest of it. And fortunately, because of that awareness of how Republican voters were seeing all this, that last desperate attempt to change the rules and unbind the delegates failed miserably. I think there was also a procedural violation. They weren't even following the rules to change the rules. So Americans in general, Republican, Democrat, Independent, Bernie supporters, everybody, even Hillary's supporters, understand that what happened has damaged the brand. It's harmed public trust in our electoral system. A lot of people are saying this is the proof that we are not a democracy any longer. And we are not a republic with democratically elected leaders, for the nitpickers who like to go on out there. This is a nation ruled by party politics, just like the Soviet Union was. Just like Nazi Germany was. Yes.
Mike, thank you so much for your work and your time. I'm going to let you go. I know you got a lot of work to do.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to close the phone lines for a little while because I got some stories I really, really need to get to. And the corporate media is still pushing this whole thing. This is all a Russian plot against Hillary Clinton. She's such a poor victim. Why don't you vote her for president? Well, first of all, we don't want somebody who's a perpetual victim in that White House. That's a bad idea to begin with. But they're out there just pushing this idea that it should be beyond question that Russia was behind the hack of the DNC emails, and you should ignore what is actually in those DNC emails, or else you're a Russian stooge. And it's all rumor, insinuation, vilification. Donald Trump and the bad old Russians. Bad old Russians. Now, we've posted a lot of articles regarding election fraud this year and in the past. We reposted the Hacking Democracy documentary to the front page. It's a good thing to watch over the weekend. And I've gotten emails from people who'd never seen it before. And they were absolutely shocked, especially that end scene where they demonstrate how easy it is to change the results of an election on these official electronic voting machines. And one of the election workers just breaks into tears because she believed that they were running an honest, fair, uncheatable system. And that was an emotional shock here. So we ran a flashback to this story that appeared back in Counterpunch in May that came to the same conclusion that the more recent Stanford study did. Clinton did best where voting machines flunked the hacking tests. If electronic voting machines that were open to hacking were being used, Hillary did unexpectedly well. And there's another video by a gentleman in New York who's talking about the disparity between the official results and the exit polls, and reminding everybody that under the U.S. State Department and the United Nations, a discrepancy of 2% between the exit polls and the official results signifies election fraud has taken place. And in some of the Democratic primaries, there was a discrepancy of up to 13% between the official results, which favored Hillary Clinton, and those exit polls. 13%. Of course there's fraud going on. And people should be very, very angry. Remember what Joseph Stalin said. People who vote decide nothing. People who count the votes decide everything. We now have Stalinist Russia voting systems in our country right now. And it didn't work out very well for the Russians under Stalin. Now, another article from Accuracy in Media talking about the hacked DNC emails, startling implications. And basically, without needing to go into any specifics, they're saying it paints this incredible picture of an out-of-control, corrupted party machine that is usurping the right of the people to pick their own candidates and favoring the bankers, the large corporations, Israel, always Israel above all. And there's another article over here in Moon of Alabama that raises the same question I did yesterday. Will these preemptive accusations that Russia is going to hack the November election be used to cover up election fraud, or if Donald Trump wins, to negate the election results? Hillary Clinton would not hesitate to go right up to the Supreme Court the way George Bush did back in 2000, get the Supreme Court to say, well, we're pretty certain Russia was tinkering with our vote results, so Donald Trump is not the president and Hillary Clinton is, and you may not use our decision as precedent in any future legal cases, which is what they said back in 2000. When the Supreme Court handed down their decision granting the presidency to George W. Bush, part of that dynastic family that swaps the White House back and forth, they literally added at the bottom, nobody is allowed to use this decision as a legal precedent in any future case. It's the only time in the history of the United States Supreme Court that they went to that length. Now, Jerome Corsi is out there in an article, WorldNet Daily, talking about the Clinton Foundation. And he says, there is a venue there for prosecution that might actually be far easier than her private email server or even pay to play. And it's a little unexpected, and when we come back from these commercials, I will tell you what it is. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and I'm sure you, like me, are frustrated at all the things the Clintons and the Bushes have gotten away with without facing any kind of justice. And I think that moment when FBI Director James Comey went down the list of felony-level Title 18 violations and then said, we're not recommending charges because she didn't mean to do wrong, basically tells you what's going on. Now, the fact of the matter is Title 18 does not require intent. It's spelled out in there. Exposing national secrets through carelessness is a violation. And that's what Comey tried to excuse Hillary with. She was careless. She was reckless. She was negligent. Good qualities for a president, don't you think? So Jerome Corsi's done this interview over at WorldNet Daily and Radio America. And he said, instead of trying to go down this whole email server issue and trying to document the State Department pay for play through the foundation, there's a much simpler way. And it's called inurement. Now, inurement is a criminal offense, and it means running a charity for your own benefit. And it's much easier to prove than the corruption involved with foreign governments donating to the foundation and then getting special treatment from the State Department, especially now that the FBI has taken over that investigation from Larry Klayman. But for inurement, you don't need a quid pro quo. You just show the financial reporting is fraudulent, that money has gone in there for charitable purposes and never showed up. Haiti would be wide open for that. Huge amounts of money went into the Clinton Foundation for Haiti, and the Haitians got almost none of it. And so that is a legal venue that could be pursued, including by those who thought they were donating to a real charity. This could be civil litigation. Now, according to the latest USC Los Angeles Times daily poll, Trump has pulled an additional half point ahead just in the last 24 hours. We are not seeing the expected post-convention bump for Hillary. Now, interestingly enough, somebody out in California actually got a video of one of the touch screen voting machines, and they kept touching for Bernie Sanders, and the Sanders vote was switched to another candidate. They got that on video. The documentation, it's just obvious. We're seeing massive, massive election fraud. And if they're doing it during the primaries, it's a guarantee they're going to try and do it in November. And so we need a lot of honest people to volunteer to be poll workers and keep an eye out. We need observers. And frankly, if Donald Trump does win the White House, and I sincerely hope he does, one of the first things I'm going to recommend he does is get rid of those electronic machines. We need to go back to paper ballots and hand counting. And by the way, for all this caterwauling in the corporate media about how Russia's going to hack the vote in November, well, we can prevent that. Don't use the electronic machines. It's a wonderful solution. If you're really genuinely worried that Russia is going to hack the election through those electronic machines, then don't use the electronic machines. It's a simple solution, and yet nobody is actually talking about that because we know who is really doing the election hacking, and they need those electronic machines. So let's turn to the war zones right now. Emphasis on the plural. Things in Syria are going great for the Syrian government and the Syrian people, not so good for the United States. Syrian government forces are now closing in on Aleppo. They are expecting they will have humanitarian corridors opening within the next day, where they can start sending in food and medical supplies and all this other assistance to those Syrian civilians who've been basically been held hostage by the U.S.-backed rebels. So they're going to start getting supplies in there. Meanwhile, over at the United... Oh, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the spoiled children are back attacking my server. Somewhere around America, there's a room full of children flinging themselves on the floor and pounding their fists and kicking their feet and screaming, "How dare he tell the truth about the Empress Hillary?" Well, too bad. My advice is... Hello? Hi, what happened? Okay, well, that was a sudden something. My advice to all politicians or corporate executives or anybody, if you don't want to have people saying bad things about you, don't do bad things to begin with. Doesn't that make a lot of sense? Instead, we seem to have this culture where everybody wants to do bad things, sell bad products, dangerous products, molest small children, run fraud. And then they get upset when people want to talk about it. I have a right to cheat the American people, but you don't have a right to call me on it. What do you think this is, a freedom of speech? All right. Now then, we're talking about what's going on with Syria. And what's going on with Syria is it's basically all but over. They're closing in on Aleppo. They're expecting to finally get humanitarian corridors open to get food and medical supplies into those people who have been held in a state of starvation and desperation by the U.S.-backed forces inside Syria. Over at the United Nations, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, Samantha Powers, is out there complaining that Syria is dropping these leaflets, urging civilians to cooperate with the Syrian army and offering them safe passage. And Samantha Powers is out there saying, the Syrian people shouldn't be cooperating with a government that's been bombing and killing them. At which point the Syrian representative stood up to remind everybody that only today, another U.S.-led coalition strike has killed 45 civilians near Manbij. And looking at Samantha Powers' statement, again, it's panic. They're in serious trouble. This whole plan to dollarize the Middle East is falling apart. Apparently, 5,000 protesters encircled the Incirclic base, screaming death to the U.S. Oh my goodness, they must hate us for our freedoms. Interesting revelation in this article. When Incirclic was first surrounded and a no-fly zone declared over it, they mentioned the problem of these nuclear weapons that are at that base. And the article back then said there are over 50 of these B-61 tactical nuclear weapons. Selectable yield, they top out at 370 kilotons each, which is a pretty big blast. In the latest article, they're admitting that it's actually closer to 90 of these weapons are on that base. And they were put on that base to wag at Russia and threaten them with. And now all of a sudden, they're in a real situation of possibly having made Turkey under Erdogan a nuclear power. Now, Turkey is continuing to present evidence that the U.S. was ultimately behind the failed coup attempt. And they've basically announced once they get confirmation that the United States was directly involved in this failed coup, they are probably going to leave NATO. And they're definitely pivoting away from Europe and the West. They're talking about new deals with Russia. Putin and Erdogan are meeting next week. And if they come to an agreement, dropping sanctions, pipeline deals and everything, the party is over. The U.S. will have lost the war in Syria because they can't do anything if Turkey is now on the side of Russia in restoring Syria to the Syrian people and the legitimate Syrian government. Basically, in a nutshell, Putin is sitting back and laughing himself silly watching NATO tear itself apart with all this warmongering. Because they're botching it up. Still stuck in Afghanistan, still stuck in Iraq, still stuck in Yemen, still stuck in Libya, can't get into Syria, let alone Iran. It's coming apart. All right, let's grab a phone call. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Yes, I want to just make some comments. I'm looking forward to the next 3 months of comic entertainment called the election campaign in America. Mm-hmm. But more seriously, Turkey now looks to be making a real rapprochement with Russia, which means Russia doesn't need the south of Cyprus for a base and an air base. They can go to northern Cyprus where Turkey holds sway.
They can have bases right in Turkey.
Yep.
I mean, Turkey could take Incirklik and hand it over to Russian control and just tell the Americans, get out, and by the way, we're keeping the nuclear weapons.
Absolutely, and the gains that are being made now is large areas of Aleppo that have been actually freed from the Takfiris. That I'm reading certain articles which from the Syrian, the SAA, the news agency.
Yes.
It looks like within the next week, Aleppo will fall to the Syrian Arab Army and the Russian air power, and that means essentially this, if you like, this regime change in Syria is finished. Obama will walk.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And here's what's really interesting. Remember when they went into Syria and they first said, well, we need to free the Syrian people from the evil Assad. He's using chemical weapons on his own people, and that turned out to be a lie. Then they tried to rebrand the war in Syria by saying, we're not really in Syria to do anything about Assad. We're there to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And then we find out that Obama and Secretary of State Hillary Clinton are arming and supplying ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Syria. And now, let me finish. With Samantha Power's statement to the United Nations, they're back to this idea about Assad is bad, Assad has to go. Now, if Turkey and Russia align with each other, and Syria gets Aleppo, basically that's it. The only way the United States can go back into Syria is simply to launch an invasion from outside. And that will tell the world who really is the aggressor in all of this warmongering, and it's not Russia.
Well, I'm looking further than that from what's coming out of Turkey and the Middle East in general. America is losing its sway in Iraq, in Yemen, in Libya, and all these other places, Syria, even Afghanistan. Now, that what they're saying is that the rebels, the Taliban, freedom fighters, are actually gaining ground against this puppet government in Kabul. So, the whole foreign policy of this administration is going up in flames, basically.
And we need to remember who was Secretary of State when all of this stuff was set in motion. And do we really want this same individual holding the keys to the nuclear arsenal in the Oval Office? And I understand there's a two-man rule, but I don't think Hillary would let that stand in her way.
Sure she wouldn't. But again, I mean, we're seeing this pivot to Asia, and the response is Russia and China now are having a huge exercise in the South China Sea.
And what's alarming about that is so is the United States. They sort of took a lot of RIMPAC that was normally supposed to be around the Hawaiian Islands and just decided to spend all the fuel and everything to go on over and have their exercises in the South China Sea. It's just a military exercise. We're not confronting you. We're not trying to provoke you. And it really is becoming very transparent what's going on. And I do love the way that Syria responded to Samantha Power's comment about, the Syrian people shouldn't cooperate with the government that's bombing them. And then Syria comes out and says, by the way, you guys bombed another 45 civilians today.
Yeah, well, that was just telling, really, of what's really been happening with American targeting of what they're targeting in Syria is the civilians. They're not targeting.
No, they keep missing ISIS and Al Qaeda and the oil things. Anyway, John, I need to let you go. Got more phone calls to take coming up on the top of the hour with the lovely lady Claire. So thank you for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Martin in Los Angeles. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Very sad news out of Idaho today in the Jack Yandis case. The Attorney General of Idaho has announced that there will be no charges filed against the two officers who slaughtered Jack on November 1st of last year. Very, very sad and disappointing, devastating. Of course, that's par for the course, I guess. But as usual, the dash cam was conveniently turned off. The two officers who both had body cams, they didn't release any video or even mention it. And they did not, the official investigation, which is dragged out for almost a year, they didn't mention anything about the fact that one of the deputies Jack was about to kill his bull. If you remember, the bull got hit by a car, and they called Jack out.
Yeah, Yandis was out there at the request of the sheriff's department, and he went to put the bull down, and for some reason, prescription antidepressants or whatever, the police officers killed him. And now, of course, they're being let off scot-free, and that is another sign that we have descended into a dictatorship.
Absolutely, very, very sad. And they didn't even mention or explain why the officer had yanked him back by the shoulder as he has his gun pointed at the bull. His wife was there, his nephew was there with the spotlight, the tractor, doing this whole operation. And they've done this many times before. They've been ranchers in this town for centuries, actually, his family. But there is one thing. The family is filing a civil suit, but also more important, if people want to support, there's a retired man who's running for sheriff in the elections in November. So his name is Tom Watts, and he looks like a pretty good guy. So he's running against the current sheriff who has defended these killers all along. It's very nasty. So Tom Watts for Adams County Sheriff, I think, what the locals want at this point.
Well, I think they should. Basically, we need to scrape out the existing system and replace it with all new people at all levels of government, and remind all these newcomers coming on in, their names are written on their office doors in dry erase marker. And this Yandis case, it was just completely inappropriate. There should have been charges against these police officers. They had absolutely no justification for doing what they did, and they're being let off scot-free. Anyway, Martin, I need to let you go. I got a couple more phone calls to get to, and then we're going to close the phone lines again. Glenn in Philadelphia, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike.
Hi.
Just re-emphasizing what you talked about. As opposed as I am to these refugees and all the havoc they're raising and crime they're committing and rape and murder and stuff, they're injuring and killing people one at a time, a handful at a time. Our errant bombs kill people by the dozens on an ongoing basis, and over the long term, we've killed hundreds of thousands or maybe even a couple million people through things like the Iraqi no-fly zone in the millions.
U.S. foreign policy has created the refugee crisis. It's being taken advantage of, but everybody's out there saying, we should be kind to the refugees, we should open our borders. No, what you need to do is stop these U.S. wars of aggression that have made them refugees in the first place. These people would be perfectly happy to stay in their native countries, in their homes, if the homes weren't being bombed to rubble by constant U.S. assault. And again, all of this is coming out of U.S. foreign policy, and all of this was set in motion by Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
Right, and right now it's Europe that's actually taking the brunt of our miscreants, one other thing, Mike, so please don't be too angry at this. It's Incirlik. There's no circ. There's no separate C or J in the middle of it. It's just Incirlik. Yep.
Incirlik. I stand corrected. Part of it is the transliteration of Turkish into English. And Europe paying the price for U.S. foreign policy, it's not just that. It's economic policy. When the U.S. launched this poorly thought out oil price war against Russia, it harmed Europe. It harmed Venezuela. It harmed the fracking industry. Not that we feel bad about that. Harmed Canada. The collateral damage far outweighed any effect it had on Russia. Same thing with all these Russian sanctions. It's absolutely slammed Europe's economy at a time when Europe's economy is not resilient. It's hovering at the edge. And you have to wonder, when does the world stand up and realize that the United States is the author of all of this? And when do they simply throw up their hands and say, we're not listening to you anymore. We're not going to do what you tell us to do anymore. What are you going to do, bomb us now? Going to bomb Great Britain? Going to bomb France?
Right. And furthermore, what happens when we finally reap what we've sown? When we finally reap the whirlwind for the wind we've sown? Anyway. All right. Thank you, Mike.
All right, thank you. We're going to switch to Frank in London, then we're going to close the phone lines. Frank, what's on your mind?
Yeah. Hi, Mike. I just want to make a distinction between the American government and the puppet masters of Wall Street and the American people. I think there's a massive difference, so I always like to make that difference. What does this Samantha Power thing, the bomb that's being dropped in on the civilians in Syria, they love bombs or something, so it's okay, they died with love, yeah?
Well, I mean, what Samantha is trying to do is she's trying to find some way to hold off the inevitable outcome of the Syrian war. Assad is already talking about a blanket pardon for all of the rebels who will lay down their weapons and surrender. And that, of course, is a very attractive offer right now, being cut off from their supply lines in Turkey. And so she's just trying to come up with something to say, you know, Syria is doing a bad thing by urging their civilians to cooperate. And probably tomorrow she's going to be saying, well, you know, we shouldn't be allowing Assad to send in humanitarian aid because he's going to use it to control his population, like the U.S. doesn't use food stamps to control our population. And it's absolute desperation. It's not well thought out. It doesn't make any sense at all. Anyway, listen, Frank, we're coming up at a commercial break. I need to let you go, and I need to get back to some of these stories. What's happening over in Israel, there was this mayor from Galilee who has caused a huge ruckus by saying he didn't want Arabs to use swimming pools of predominantly Jewish towns and cities. And, of course, everybody came on out and said that's very racist. And he says, no, if you think it's racist, you're being an anti-Semite. And he's trying to backpedal by saying, I don't hate Arabs, but I don't want them in my pools. I don't go to their pools either. This from the same nation that's at the forefront of demands that Europe and the United States allow in masses of refugees and illegal immigrants. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to talk a little bit about the economy before we get to the top of the hour and the lovely Lady Claire. Apparently, over in Greece, the government is now slamming the IMF and the EU and saying that the way Greece's debt was placed on them was inappropriate. And we know it was. Half of that debt came from this underhanded deal between Papandreou and Goldman Sachs to conceal Greece's true debt situation from the EU. And then when Papandreou left, the new government came in and said, oh boy, are we in trouble. And the attitude that we've gotten from the IMF, from Christine Lagarde, who is now facing prosecution for some of her nefarious doings, is we don't care how the debt was created. Debt is debt. Debt is holy. Debt is sacrosanct. You, the Greek people, will go without to pay this debt off, even though much of it was created through fraud. Well, we know there are certain debts that are considered odious debts and not the responsibility of the people of a nation to pay. And it looks like Greece may be moving in that direction, pushing for debt repudiation and relief. Just write it all off. And the IMF and the EU don't want to do that. It's not like they think there's actually any value to all that ink and paper. But keeping a nation in debt is keeping them under control. Rule by compound interest. Now, apparently, earlier today, Japanese government bond futures suddenly halted trading. And the Japanese Osaka Exchange is saying they're investigating what happened. But usually when trading is halted on something, it is a sign something may be going very, very wrong. Over in Italy, they're preparing rescue bids ahead of coming stress tests on the bank, meaning they don't think the banks will pass the stress tests. Deutsche Bank is, according to the Story and Investment Watch blog, Deutsche Bank is saying not even fiscal stimulus can save them. They're in that much trouble. Now, yesterday, Ukraine announced that they just weren't going to pay the $3 billion they owe Russia. They got all huffy and said, well, we don't like the Russians. We don't like what they're doing in Crimea. The debt was all political. No, it wasn't. It's money owed for the natural gas Russia's been sending to Ukraine. And Russia has announced today that if Ukraine does not pay that $3 billion, they're going to start trying to seize Ukrainian assets held in other countries. So that situation is escalating. Now, here in the United States, we've seen this pattern before. They'll come out with glowing news about how great the economy is, and then down the road they'll revise the figures and saying, well, it wasn't as good as we thought it was. But it's great now. The U.S. economy grew only 1.2% in the second quarter, and the first quarter has been revised downward to 0.8%. Okay, there's the music. We're going to take a break. We'll be back with the Lady Claire. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. And for those of you watching on BAM User, the gorgeous creature sitting behind me is the lovely Lady Claire,
aloha,
who will join us on third hour Fridays with her own unique perspective on the world. So what is the first thing you want to talk about?
Well, apparently the United States government is getting ready to deploy B-1 bombers to Guam for the first time in a decade. Guam is about 2,000 miles away from China. Mike, how long do you think it would take for one of those fighting aircraft to make it from Guam to China?
Would depend on the route that they took,
right.
How many times they would have to refuel in the air.
Okay.
And I'm not up to date on the current specs of the B-1,
mm-hmm.
but it is another forward basing of threatening assets. At the same time, John Kerry is out there saying, we're not trying to force a confrontation with China.
Of course not.
We're just in the habit of putting all these weapons all over the planet near people that we don't like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is just another instance of that. I know you spoke a little bit about Turkey, but there are some other things brewing that are, well, double plus on good, and you're not going to hear about it on the corporate news. Apparently, a top U.S. general is being rushed to Turkey amid assassination and accusations of the U.S. plotted coup. This guy is Joint Chief of Staff Chairman Joseph Dunford, and he is on an unexpected visit. And Turkish officials announced that he's going to be visiting the country on July 31st after negotiating over the phone with his Turkish counterpart, General Akar. And the 31st, folks, is Sunday. Something is coming down very badly.
Well, I think he's trying to get there ahead of Putin and Erdogan's meeting, which is happening next week.
Right.
But at this point, it's definitely
mm-hmm.
too little, far too late,
yeah.
because certainly from the actions of Turkey's government, they very clearly seem to think that the United States was part of this coup,
right.
and they're changing their foreign policy. They're pivoting away from the U.S. and
mm-hmm.
the European Union.
Right.
They're talking about leaving NATO. And they're going all buddy-buddy with Russia. So this is a major foreign policy disaster for
mm-hmm.
the United States.
I have to wonder if President Obama hasn't dispatched Dunford, hoping that he will be made the sacrificial lamb as a justification for a preemptive invasion of Turkey by NATO, to ultimately destabilize Erdogan, topple him and put in a more Western-centric head of government. What do you think, Mike?
That is a real reach here because if they shoot down his plane and blame Turkey for it, they're not going to get a lot of traction because of what happened with the obvious cover-up after the shoot-down of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17.
Right, right.
And that's a reality that I would hope the U.S. government is starting to address. They are not trusted in what they're telling either the American people or the world.
Yeah.
They've got a monumental credibility problem of their own making. I have no sympathy for them. And so I think you would probably find that most of the other NATO nations, which are already getting very cool on this idea of a war with Russia, would say, let's go on in and hit the country that was our friend only a few weeks ago and lay waste to it.
Yeah.
Right now, again, I'm getting a sense of panic that the whole Middle East foreign policy agenda is falling apart.
Yeah.
Samantha Power's statements to the United Nations were just ludicrous on the face of them. It's a statement made by somebody who feels they have to make a statement that continues to support the American agenda.
Right.
But it really didn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense, especially when the very next day the U.S. bombs another 45 civilians in Syria.
Right, I hear you. And apparently yesterday, thousands were yelling death to U.S. near the Incirlik Air Base.
Okay, I've been corrected saying there is no K in the middle of it. It's in Incirlik.
Incirlik, okay.
Incirlik.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
And apparently, finally, after the crowd had gone to about 5,000, Turkish police came in and broke it up before they could actually get to the major NATO military facility. And
you're telling me NATO can't even protect its own base? That doesn't make it sound very credible for NATO to take on Russia.
No, it doesn't. And the other thing that is very disturbing, the country's labor minister was telling Haberturk News that Washington was behind the coup, and the Prime Minister Binali Yildirim is threatening all-out war against the U.S.
Well, that is a little bit reckless.
Yeah, that's overreach.
But again, we are now finding out that apparently the number of these B-61 nuclear weapons, or the number, let me correct that, the number of nuclear weapons of all kinds at that Incirlik base is close to 90. We know some of them are the B-61 bombs. There could be other types there. In fact, I saw one report saying that there are, in fact, multi-stage hydrogen bombs stored there as well.
Yikes.
And if Turkey were to grab those, it would be suicide for Erdogan to do it, but in his mental state, he might just go ahead and start flinging nuclear bombs in all directions at everybody he doesn't like.
I am very concerned about the state of the U.S. service people serving at that NATO base. I really am.
Well, some of them have been arrested and accused of being part of the coup plot.
Right.
So maybe, I'm just going to take a wild guess here, that this gentleman who's going over to meet with the Turkish government on Sunday is carrying some kind of a peace offer, a bribe, something to try and bring Turkey back into the U.S. embrace. But I don't think Erdogan is going to be very receptive because clearly the United States basically betrayed somebody that we were told was a friend.
Yeah.
Okay, we got to do a shout-out to our on-air affiliates.
Okay.
Welcome back to our network. We're talking about all kinds of current events with the lovely lady Claire, and at the moment we're talking about Turkey. We're talking about the Turks seem to be operating on the belief that the United States was ultimately the author of this coup d'etat, and there's certainly ample reason to consider that because it's been a repeating pattern. As long as a U.S. puppet goes on being a U.S. puppet, they're supported, they're bribed, they're taken care of. But when these puppet rulers decide they don't want to be puppets and go their own way, immediately they are taken out. We saw that with Saddam Hussein, who was a loyal American servant when he was in Iraqi politics, when he went to war with Iran on behalf of the United States. Then all of a sudden he says, we're going to sell Iraq's oil for the euro. And at that moment, he went right to the top of the U.S. government's special high-interest targets list, and the U.S. invaded, lynched him. Iraq's oil is back on the world market for the U.S. dollar. Same thing appears to have happened with Erdogan, where he was doing whatever the U.S. wanted in regards to Syria, and then all of a sudden he pulls back and says, I'm getting tired of all this nonsense with Syria, and he starts talking to Russia, talking to Iran, talking to China. And at that point, the U.S. goes on in and apparently on short notice tried to cowboy a coup d'etat, and they failed miserably.
Yep. And as part of the shakeout, Turkey is shaking up its armed forces, and the U.S. says the purges are harming cooperation. And NATO is complaining that the purges of generals and officers are hindering cooperation in the fight against the Islamic State. Now, yesterday, late, the military announced that there was a promotion of 99 colonels to the rank of general or admiral. Staff Chief Hulusi Akar and the Army, Navy, and Air Force commanders are in their posts. The announcement came shortly after the dishonorable discharge of nearly 1,700 military personnel over their alleged roles in the abortive putsch. And 246 people were killed and more than 2,000 were injured. This was not a minor situation by any stretch.
No, it was close. And again, I think the reason that Erdogan is still in power, he did receive advance warning from the Russians.
Right.
How they got word of it, we don't know. But Erdogan is obviously operating as if he believes the U.S. was behind it and Russia is his new friend. And it is a major foreign policy disaster for the United States because Turkey is considered the gateway to that greater Middle Eastern region because of its strategic location. And if Turkey abandons the war on Syria, then the U.S. has lost that war in Syria, and that could be the end of this whole militarist agenda in the Middle East. Erdogan has already come on out saying that he's ready to work in partnership with Russia and Iran to bring peace to the entire Middle East.
Absolutely, and he would certainly be seen as one of the good guys in that process.
At that point. And if, in fact, he seizes control of those nuclear weapons, then that is going to checkmate Israel, which wants more turmoil so that they can grab more land.
Right.
Because Israel has nuclear weapons, and they're very butch about wagging them around as long as nobody has any way to shoot back. But because of this coup d'etat, the U.S. may have inadvertently created a second well-armed nuclear power in the Middle East to balance off against Israel.
You know, it's very strange in this administration and the previous. There seems to be a tremendous amount of wanting people who are pathologically incapable of thinking a scenario all the way through to its logical conclusion.
Well, we've uncovered why that is. Part of the DNC email leaks were the lists of all the top Hillary donors who were going to be rewarded with top government positions.
Right, right.
And the fact of the matter is people who are very, very rich aren't necessarily smarter, more perceptive, more experienced. They just got fat wallets. In many cases, they've inherited much of their money. So, appointing people with a lot of money to these top government positions is not going to get you the best policy analysts.
I agree. I understand. In kind of looking at a map, it looked to me like the best fallback position for NATO would be to enhance the capabilities of the pseudo-NATO base in Crete. But, I don't know how much engineering and how much enlargement that would take. But it seemed to be the closest in the area. But it does put the U.S. and NATO further away from the Middle East than it wants to be.
Absolutely. And this idea, the West has always ruled the Middle East by turning people against each other, keeping them constantly hostile. That's why, if you go back to the original story of Lawrence of Arabia, even though what he accomplished was seen as a positive thing by the media and the general population, it was seen as actually having harmed the ability to influence the Middle East by keeping all these separate little tribes constantly hostile with each other.
Yes. I'd like to sort of bop over to Israel. And something happened, and this is just an individual story, but it's very indicative of what happens to Palestinians who desperately need medical care. There is a Palestinian lady, breast cancer survivor, Nadia Abu Nala, and she could not get the regular periodic medical checkup she needs. In 2009, she was successfully treated at Sheba Medical Center in Tel HaShomer, went through chemotherapy, an operation, radiation, and she received exit visas and permits for all stages. Of all of her family, the only one who was permitted to be with her was her mom. And afterwards, she had regular follow-ups with the team, and they treated her very wonderfully. But unfortunately, the medical equipment needed for periodic exams is not found in the Gaza Strip. In fact, it's forbidden to import it. And the last time she put in a request to have the exit visa so she could go for her exam, it was declined for absolutely no reason. And, I don't understand. I'm still kind of shaking my head How did this woman's request not meet the criteria for urgent medical care under the circumstances?
Well, it probably did, but the attitude, unfortunately, of the Israelis is that Palestinians are not really humans anyway, and there's just this tendency to want to punish the Palestinians for daring to be, on the Khazars' adopted homeland.
And breathing.
And still breathing.
Yeah.
We had that other incident where the Israeli authorities, while we're all distracted with the DNC and events in other countries, they've gone on a binge of destroying Palestinian homes. And, in fact, they destroyed a Palestinian home yesterday with the Palestinians still in it, killing him.
Yeah, it just... And we continue to support financially. The government of the U.S. continues to support. What is the latest package? $40 billion, I believe, over 10 years?
Something like that, yeah. It's a huge amount of money. And, again, why are we sending money to Israel when it has an economy that's stronger than pretty much all of Europe? Israel doesn't really need the money. They want it.
Yeah.
But they don't really need it. They're not in a situation of need. And what they do with the money is they just buy and build weapons. And in past years, this money that was going to Israel, there was some recovery because Israel was required to purchase certain amounts of their weapons from U.S. suppliers. Well, in the New Deal, apparently Israel has free rein to simply spend that money within Israel itself, which means we're not going to get anything back for all of this money other than a hand sticking on out and saying, give me more.
Yeah, and any aid to Israel is illegal under the Symington Amendment. That's something that
the Glenn Act.
Yeah, that's something that Congress really does a good job of ignoring.
Well, again, this is why I keep saying it is not enough to get Donald Trump into the Oval Office this November. We have to give him a Congress that will work with him and not block his every step. And I'm starting to see the beginnings of an anti-incumbency fever sweeping the electorate. And we're seeing a lot of these old guard politicians all of a sudden discovering they're in a real fight to hang on to their job.
Yeah.
John McCain is facing an uphill battle. Paul Ryan is facing an uphill battle. Debbie Wasserman Schultz is facing an uphill battle. And the reality is Washington, D.C. is in dire need of an enema. All over. And the American voters have a chance to do that in November. So we need to kick out this old guard, the Israel firsters, the war hawks, the pro-bankers, and we need to put in some new blood into Congress that is willing to work with Donald Trump and pull this nation back from the abyss.
I agree. And one of the things that you have to look at in a very cold and analytical way, your own alleged congressional representatives. What have they done to make your life better, easier, make it easier for you to work, to find work? And those are questions Americans need to ask themselves in this election cycle. They really do.
You absolutely do here, because we're seeing the result of all these donors who get high government positions, and they're thinking in terms of their own wealth. Yeah. And again, the stupidity of raising taxes, raising costs, ordering us to buy Obamacare insurance policies. At the same time, they're sending high-paying jobs to other countries and trying to drive down wages and salaries. Now, obviously, that's a train wreck about to happen.
Yeah.
Because in a healthy, functioning economy, there has to be a mechanism where the money that accumulates inevitably at the top gets recycled back down to the bottom so that ordinary workers have decent wages and salaries, without which they're not going to be going to the shopping malls and buying the products that are for sale there. They're not going to be buying new cars or newer cars. They're not going to be buying big screen TV sets. They're not going to be buying homes. And by the way, home acquisition by Americans is at I think it's a 7-year low now.
Yeah.
Okay? The system is breaking down, and it's being destroyed by the money junkies who only see the acquisition of more wealth for themselves as the only operating agenda out there.
Yeah. There was a very interesting article in Zero Hedge. America's aging baby boomers forced to work until death, blamed for collapsing U.S. productivity. You know, I looked at this and I had to shake my head. This is another way of saying that employers are keeping on hiring older, experienced workers at the expense of younger millennials who are unable to find jobs due to bottlenecking as a result of the same older workers who refuse to retire for no other reason but simply because their savings no longer generates a cash flow.
But we're going to blame the workers.
Yeah.
We're not going to blame the government policy and the banker policy that created this mess. Yeah. It's all your fault. You should be dying younger. We need to go to Logan's Run when when you're at the retirement age. We just vaporize you.
Yeah. Because with over $10 trillion in savings generating no income and thus crushing the velocity of money, the real reason why the U.S. is facing a productivity crisis of epic proportions is because the central planners have destroyed an entire generation's hopes of being able to retire.
That's exactly right. Plus, they embezzled the Social Security money, and it is a mess. And nobody was maintaining that overview, the wide view, the long view, and that really is supposed to be the job of Washington, D.C., and certainly the president. And they let us all down. We'll be right back after these commercials. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're going to take a quick phone call. Tom in Florida. Aloha, Tom. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Tom, are you there? All right, we're going to let Tom go here, and Claire, let's go back to your next story.
Apparently, the Federal Reserve is preparing for negative interest rates. Yellen recently said, chair of the Fed, said that it had the legal authority to use negative interest rates if the market conditions warranted that. And the thing I have to ask, Mike, if they do go with negative rates, what is the point of saving any money inside any U.S. financial institution?
Absolutely none.
Yeah.
And we're starting to see the same thing over in Europe, where the banks are going to say, if you have your money in a savings account, we're going to just take a little bit from you every month. And, of course, people are going to say, well, that's a raw deal. I mean, I grew up in an era where the whole idea of having a savings account is it would make your money grow.
Yeah.
And people are going to be taking their money out of the banks and taking it home and keeping it under their control. And, of course, the only way this is going to work in the long run when this gets really abusive, this is why we're seeing the push to ban all cash.
That's what I thought.
So by law, you will have your money in somebody's bank somewhere. You're not allowed to take it out. You do everything on your little plastic card so the government knows what you're spending your money on. And even that is not going to work. Because people will take that little plastic card and they'll go down to their local coin and bullion dealer and say, whatever's in this account, empty it out and give me the equivalent in silver and gold, which means when they ban cash, they're going to ban private ownership of silver and gold. What they're going to ban is any portable store of value that allows you to have control over your own wealth. And that's how desperate they are right now. And it's still, in the long run, not going to work. It really isn't. But it's a sign of the desperation that they have of trying to grab what's left of the world's wealth and put it in their pocket. And the more they do it, the more unstable the economy becomes, the closer we come to collapse and worse, revolution. Apparently, Tom in Florida is now back on the line. Tom, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good day, Michael. Yes, watching a little bit of that convention last night with Chelsea rolls out with her red dress. I was thinking back about the Monica Lewinsky dress and all that was going on with Bill Clinton. And he was an impeached president, but they don't talk about it in the media hardly ever. But actually, he was an impeached president, Michael. And people are not talking about Bill Clinton's escapades in the media because it's all, like Michael Savage said, it's all a bunch of you got wolf blitzers and sheep clothing in the media. But, another thing, Michael, the media is not talking about. Can you imagine what does Israel have on Hillary as far as emails? And what about China? What about when Bill Clinton sold the gyro systems for their rocketry? So the Chinese now had caught up to almost the United States when it comes to rocketry in the 90s.
Well, that story is about to become current events right now because the gentleman who was the facilitator for that, Englap Singh, has now been arrested on an unrelated bribery charge, and he's now back in the United States of America where congressional investigators who were looking into Chinagate can now talk to him, and he cannot refuse. So that is about to blow up in Hillary's face as well.
Well, Michael, one more thing. You know how much Monica Lewinsky's made off of Bill Clinton because of I didn't have sex with that woman? You know how many millions of dollars she's made off that deal over a blue dress with a stain on it? Millions.
Well, good for her.
Child payment, huh?
I said good for her. I mean, she certainly made out a lot better than a lot of other of Bill's paramours or victims. Kathleen Wiley lost her home. a lot of Bill's parameters.
Paula Jones got $850,000 in one shot over Bill Clinton. The media never talks about that. They actually, like Michael Jackson had to pay off. Billy Blythe paid Paula Jones $850,000. You check it out.
Okay. We know all about that stuff.
The story of Paula Jones.
Okay. All right, listen, we got to let you go. We're coming up on another commercial break. We're going to close the phone lines for the rest of the day so that Claire can get on to this huge, thick pile of stories that she wants to talk about. Meanwhile, before we do the commercial break here, article just came on out. We posted it to WhatReallyHappened.com. This is from Consortium News. Hillary Clinton and her hawks. And Hillary is already talking about massive airstrikes back into Syria as soon as she becomes president. She's going to use the power of the White House to erase the mistakes she made while Secretary of State. That is not a very positive policy for the president to be following. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And before I turn the mic back on over to the lady Claire, a very alert listener sent in a correction. U.S. home ownership is at a 50-year low.
Yikes.
And remember, home ownership used to be the foundation of the American dream, and the buildup of equity would give you the life that you had worked for, and that's all going away. It's all going away. We're being turned into a nation of renters. And finally, last bit of news from the economic world. Apparently, Microsoft has announced another 2,800 layoffs, probably from the part of the company that is working to fix the bugs in Windows 10.
Oh, dear.
So, back to you.
Apparently, South Korea really seems to be turning into a police state and is clamping down on the peace movement, protesting the deployment of the U.S. THAAD missile systems in South Korea. And a couple of days ago, the South Korean government blocked the entry of 2 Korean-American peace activists, Juyeon Ri and Hyun Lee, into its country. The two are representatives of a U.S.-based Solidarity Committee for Democracy and Peace in Korea. They had traveled to South Korea to participate in the annual Jeju Peace March, as well as join protests against the recent U.S.-South Korean decision to deploy the controversial Terminal High Altitude Area Defense or THAAD missile in South Korea. And they were detained by immigration officers, and then they were deported. Pursuant to Articles 11 and 12 of the Korean immigration law, which prohibits the entry of foreigners who, among other things, are deemed likely to commit any act detrimental to national interests in the Republic of Korea or public safety. So apparently now, under President Park, attempting to peacefully demonstrate, it has these people as persona non grata.
Well, I mean, we're seeing this police state spreading all over the world. I mean, over at the Democratic National Convention, following that ruckus over the DNC emails,
right?
Bernie Sanders supporters outside the convention hall were being put in what was called a free speech cage. But a cage is a cage is a cage is a cage. They were literally being locked away so they couldn't talk to people, they couldn't be seen by the media. And that's dictatorship right in front of you. There's no free speech if you're required to be over in this little place where nobody can hear you.
Yeah, absolutely. And to look at some other issues going on in the Asia-Pacific area. There was an article in Global Research, Former American Colony Takes Center Stage in South China Sea Dispute. And you have to wonder if Manila has been pushing at Beijing at Washington's behest.
I think that's exactly what's going on because without some local player, and for a while it was actually Vietnam and now it's shifted to the Philippines, without some local player there to act as a foil, the U.S. government has no business over there provoking China. But China is the real goal, whether they get the war with China through Korea or the Philippines or Vietnam or Japan, they don't care because the ultimate aim is a war between the U.S. paper dollar and the Russian ruble and the Chinese yuan. That's really what's at the heart of all of this. They're not only trying to start a whole new Cold War, they're trying to drag the world back to the days of Bretton Woods, where nobody on planet Earth could conduct banking or business across a border without first going through that U.S. dollar off of which the U.S. economic system made a tidy profit.
Mm-hmm.
And in this day and age of global instantaneous financial transactions, there really isn't a need for a single global currency anymore. It's an obsolete idea. And yet the United States is desperate to reassert Bretton Woods because we've allowed our manufacturing to decay over the last 35, 40 years. Nobody wants our GMO agriculture.
Right.
Without getting a mafia-like piece of the action of everybody else's commerce, the U.S. is going to collapse.
Yeah, and it appears to be more a question of when rather than if.
Yes, and I'm sure they're trying to hold it off until after the election, so that
I don't
the
know
incumbents,
that they can, though.
They may not be able to.
Yeah.
They may not be able to.
I mean, I look at our local mall and I see how many. There's a Hawaiian word for empty, puka, and we see so many pukas of stores that have just gone out of business or can no longer maintain their presence at a mall, and it's going to have a really nasty effect. Again, going into the South China area, China is going to be holding drills with Russia in the South China Sea at routine naval exercises in September and on Thursday, and saying that the drills were aimed at strengthening their cooperation and not aimed at any other country. The exercises are at a time of heightened tension because of the arbitration court in The Hague, which really has no jurisdiction when it comes to China. And China's rejected the ruling and refused to participate in the case.
And again, going back to the Cairo Convention, which was signed at the end of World War II, all of the world powers, including the United States of America, said these islands were Chinese property. They'd been stolen by Japan, and because Japan was on the losing side of World War II, the islands were restored to China.
Yeah.
And so China has a legitimate, legal, under international law, claim to those islands. And nobody really cared about those islands in the first place until China started building them up.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, we've got an excuse. We can make stink face at China. China's to blame. China's behaving badly. There really isn't a whole heck of a lot on those islands. It's like when Great Britain went to war against the Falkland Islands.
Argentina
over the Falkland Islands. And all that was on the Falkland Islands was sheep. But it was an excuse to make war on Argentina.
Yeah.
Prove how butch Maggie Thatcher was.
Yeah. And apparently the United States, India, and Japan are set to kick off a week-long war game in the Pacific very shortly, beefing up naval ties as they watch China and its buildup. Warships from the three countries are to begin the joint exercise today after an official opening ceremony at the Sasebo Naval Base in southern Japan on Thursday. Now, this is known as the Malabar exercise, and the event usually involves India and the U.S., but this is the first time that Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force will be taking part this year, the third time since 2007. And, it looks like they're going to attempt to kick up some sort of confrontation again with China.
Well, it's a very delicate situation because, the U.S. wants all these wars, but they need to make it look like it's the other side's fault.
Yeah.
Because the American people are sick and tired of war. We certainly saw that at the Democratic Convention when Leon Panetta was up there, praising Hillary for her war hawk-like attitude, and the entire convention floor was saying, no more wars, no more wars, no more war. And so they're going to have a new Reichstag fire, a new Gleiwitz incident. They're going to have to do something to make it look like we were attacked or we're about to be attacked. And again, that may probably fail because the American people, by and large, don't trust anything this government and this corporate media say anymore.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the U.S. government has earned the disdain and has no credibility to most thinking Americans at this point. I mean, zero zip none.
But they're still out there pushing as hard as they can. And who knows, at this point, I mean, they're blaming Russia for everything. The DNC hack, clothes shrinking in the dryer, human-caused global warming, the poo in the water at the Olympic venues in Brazil.
Yeah.
And so whatever happens, an asteroid's going to fall, and they're going to say, well, this was Vladimir Putin's meteor gun. And,
yes.
And they're just pushing as hard as they can to get this new world war really going, because without it, the U.S. federal government is doomed. They're mired in all of these interventions. They're losing them. They're about to lose Syria.
Yeah.
It's all falling apart. And without we've got the economic crash that's coming. And if they don't have a villain to blame it on, if they don't have a war to fall back on, when it all starts to come apart, the American people are going to point the finger of blame where it richly deserves to go: Wall Street and Washington, D.C. And that's why they're so desperate to get a war going, because that's what worked the last two times. Crash of 1907, World War I solved everything, or at least gave them somebody to blame. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008, look where we are today.
Yeah.
It's an obvious pattern.
Yeah, and the problem with patterns like this is they keep repeating.
Well, they keep repeating as long as they work, but if they try it again this time and it doesn't work, well, then by golly, they might actually have to invent something new rather than recycle the scams that worked throughout history.
Right, right. I'd like to go over to the recent terrible events in France, in Nice.
Okay.
There was a headline from the Daily Mail. Why didn't they warn the French people? Security services sent a picture of the priest killer with warning that the attack was imminent to police 4 days before the church murder, but the cops did not issue a warning or an image to the public.
It gets even worse than that.
Yeah.
The guy who actually held the knife was already facing trial on terrorism charges, but he was under house arrest, and he had an electronic tag that allowed him to leave his home for a certain amount of hours every morning. If this guy was facing trial for terrorism charges, he should have been in jail, and instead they put him out on the streets to commit another act of terror. You would almost think the government wanted the terror to happen.
Well, you know, Mike, I was looking at this article and shaking my head, and for me, the only awful and inescapable conclusion one can logically draw was that someone very high up in the French government wanted this to happen. Now, remember what happened when there was the truck incident where 84 people got mowed down and killed by the guy with road rage. And remember what Hollande did right after the incident, following the road rage incident? He extended the state of emergency for another 3 months.
Yes.
Now, with the assassination of Jacques Hamel 3 days ago, and with the grief so palpable for the French people, I have to wonder what he is looking at doing to make them feel more threatened than they already feel.
Originally, I thought the truck driver was just a case of road rage. He was on prescription antidepressants.
Yep.
But there's been an aspect of the story that emerged that exposes this was somebody's false flag terror attack. And it centers on a gentleman named Richard Gutjahr, who was the photographer who got the video of the truck starting its roll into the crowd.
Yeah.
And then only a few days later also happened to be right across the street from the Munich shopping mall and got that video of the shooter outside McDonald's starting to pull the trigger. That's an amazing coincidence for this guy to be the photographer at both of these so-called random terror events.
It's not a coincidence,
and it gets
Mike.
even more interesting when you realize he's married to a former member of Israeli intelligence services.
He knew where to be and when to be there.
He knew exactly when to be there, and somebody got really careless just assigning this guy to both of these cases and not realizing that that would be noticed by the millions of people who pour over this information on the Internet every single day. And that is something else the propagandists need to understand. Okay? When they put out a lie about 9/11, about Assad sarin gas, about whatever, they've got a huge staff. They've got hundreds and hundreds of people coming up with these frauds and hoaxes. But they're lined up against millions of Americans who have equivalent technical scientific training. That are going to be looking at it and seeing their problems and making them public. And, you know, again, in the old days, 1950s, 1960s, the government would say something, the media would broadcast it. Those who knew better didn't have a way to share their information with each other. And today, it's very, very different. That's why we tore apart 9/11 so quickly. That's why we tore apart the claim that Osama bin Laden was killed in Abbottabad so quickly and exposed the faked photos that were put on the net to try and convince us it was all real. And I imagine it must be very frustrating to be a government or corporate propagandists right now and realizing that there is no fraud or fake that's going to be as convincing as reality, and sooner or later the fraud and the fake is going to be exposed.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I have to speculate, Mike, what do you think Hollande is going to do now to further diminish the freedoms of the French people? How is he going to respond to this?
Well, he's going to just call for more draconian controls on freedom of speech. And again, Holland, like Merkel, is taking this attitude that, yes, all these refugees are causing problems, we're letting terrorists in over the border, but we have to do it. We have to keep our borders open. What's his name? Juncker, head of the EU, is vowing the open borders policy will continue. We don't care who gets killed, who gets raped, who gets their throats slashed. You know, we're all in service to the New World Order and globalism, and you people are just going to have to get with the program. And, you know, being raped is a small price to pay to be part of the New World Order.
Can't we just sort of airdrop them very gently on all the properties these world leaders own? I think that would definitely be part of the solution. Have them in their own homes.
I would absolutely.
Or on their own property.
Yeah, they've got very large estates all over the place. I think it would be a really good idea. I mean, Nancy Pelosi actually came out and said she'd love to take all the illegal immigrants home with her.
Good.
Let's hold her to it.
Yes.
Let's crowdfund some buses, grab these illegal immigrants and drop them off in Nancy Pelosi's front yard.
I think that would be a very interesting thing to have videoed.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, what is going on, Michael, with the resettling of more immigrants in the United States right now?
Well, there is a lot of secrecy going on. A lot of these communities who are getting these batches of refugees, illegal immigrants and refugees, don't know they're there until they actually show up. We know that President Obama has released over 100,000 illegal immigrants with prior criminal records, including violent crimes, into the general population because their home nations wouldn't take them back. And again, we're going to see a backlash for all of this crime. And yet, anytime you talk about wanting to control the borders, you're called a racist, and, how heartless could you be that these people have a right to go anywhere on planet Earth that they want? Okay, let's see what happens when they try and go into Israel. You know, how far they get there.
Yeah.
And Donald Trump wants to build a wall, and everybody's saying it's a bad idea. Frankly, I think it would be cheaper to just put crocodiles in the Rio Grande. But you have to understand that every nation has a right to control their borders and allow in people to be citizens who will be a benefit to the country. It doesn't make any sense saying let's have an open border policy that allows in rapists and murderers and drug smugglers and people with highly contagious diseases into our population. And anybody who says that's a bad idea is denounced as a racist. That really doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, and how are these communities supposed to fund services for these people? It's like unfunded mandates on top of the fact that many of our cities and municipalities are broke.
We don't have enough jobs for legal American citizens, so these illegals are not going to find jobs, and that means they're going to be relying on food stamps funded by U.S. taxpayers. Got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our program. Last segment of our show on this Pauhana Friday. And Claire, you had a story.
Yes, I do. Chelsea Manning could face additional punishment for her suicide attempt.
Anybody trying to commit suicide will be shot.
The U.S. Army whistleblower Chelsea Manning tried to kill herself on 5 July in her cell at Fort Leavenworth Military Prison. Now, military officials are considering filing charges in connection to the suicide attempt that could make the terms of her imprisonment much more punitive, possibly including indefinite solitary confinement, while possibly losing any chance of parole. According to a charge sheet posted by the ACLU, Manning was informed yesterday that she is under investigation for resisting the forced cell move team, prohibited property, and conduct which threatens. In the weeks following the suicide attempt, she's been very active on social media, thanking her followers for their moral support. Now, Mike, I would very like to point out politely to those contemplating additional charges against Manning as a result of her attempt to commit suicide. They're making themselves look more and more like monsters, both to American citizens and to the world, and making her look like even more a victim of a military system, which doesn't brook embarrassment at its use of torture.
Well, that's basically it. I mean, what's going on here? They're making an example of Chelsea because of the growing concern over leaks. Because as this government grows more and more corrupt, people even within the government are getting fed up and they're leaking information. Edward Snowden did. Chelsea Manning did.
Yep.
There's the leak of the DNC emails.
Right.
And apparently this Seth Rich may have been the source of the leaks to WikiLeaks.
The dead guy.
The dead guy.
Okay.
And so what the government has to do, what the military has to do, is launch a campaign of terror against their own people.
Yeah.
In which it doesn't matter what you see or what we do, you don't talk about it. Now, that is in stark contrast to the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which obligates serving military people to refuse orders which amount to war crimes and to report them to superiors. And basically what Chelsea Manning had leaked was evidence of American war crimes in Iraq, the gunning down of completely innocent people from the air, which is a war crime. And by the way, the United Nations says perpetual solitary confinement is a form of torture.
Yeah.
But our government is scared. They're trying to figure out some way they can absolutely make sure there won't be any more leaks. And it's not going to work. People are getting really, really fed up about what's going on.
You know, there's a biblical caution and injunction, that which you sow,
yes,
you shall also reap. And
we had a caller into the show who made that exact reference.
Yes.
Okay, there is the music. It's time for Claire and I to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back Monday here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay skeptical, stay informed, make good choices. Please make a point of sharing what you learn here with all of your friends and family in the real world and on the Internet. We'll be back on Monday. Aloha, America.